This is Contestants Not Appearing on Stage, a weekly game show podcast for game show enthusiasts. Episode number 6, Passive Regression, recorded November 22nd, 2015. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Contestants Not Appearing on Stage. My name is Torgo. Let's see who's joining me this week.
Oh, I'm Jason, JJMan920, Price is J, a number of things. And I think I'm going to go higher, Jim.
Randy?
What do I have to be next?
Because Nick is last.
I didn't know we had an agenda here. Okay, so I'm just going to... Okay. My name is Randy, a.k.a. Punchboard91. Blah, 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 blah. You all know that. And...
Look at that ego.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to freeze on that ace.
I'm Nick, and I'd still like to know what is a leave.
So before we get into the meat of the episode, we should start with the elephant in the room, and that is addressing the death of beloved game show host Jim Perry, who, if you don't know, is primarily known as the host of the Miss Canada pageant for the better part of 2 decades, as well as the host of Card Sharks and Sale of the Century. A much-loved presence in the game show community.
It's worth mentioning that he was also on a Canadian show called Definition. That's something I haven't seen, and I probably should see if I can find some of it just to see what it was all about. But just, you know, I enjoyed his hosting of Card Sharks and Sale of the Century. I thought Sale of the Century was a bit of a complex game to host. It was part quiz show, part Let's Make a Deal, and I thought he did it well, and obviously he did it well. I think it lasted about 6 years on daytime television and 2 years in syndication, so I thought he did a good job on that front, and he just seemed like a nice guy. Like some game show hosts, some of them don't seem like they're like personable, but he seemed like a personable person through the television.
You could tell that he was actually happy. Like it was like almost a little kid, like living his dream to be a game show host. Like you could tell he was just happy to be there. Like he knew where he came from. Like, you know, he's like, okay, I'm not that big of a person. Like, you know, I'm just like the contestants where, you know, I'm happy if they win. You know, he was just, you could tell he was actually getting into the game versus just going through the motions, just going for a paycheck.
Yeah, he was definitely the Canadian Bill Cullen, I think. He could do well with whatever format was thrown at him. I mean, look at the Twisters pilot. He did very well.
So versatile, relatable to the television audience, Jim Perry died to cancer at the age of 82. He will be missed. Moving on to The Price is Right. We won't touch upon this very much because the last episode was all Price is Right. But we had a couple, I guess, iconic moments in the past couple weeks with a dichotomy of gameplay. We had a game or two experience very notable gameplay. That was the best possible playings. We had some games that had the worst possible playings. We'll start with the positive. Pathfinder had the rare occurrence in the past 2 weeks where a contestant was able to get all the choices correct, all in a row, and pretty much just breeze right through the game and get that car. That was Monday, November 16th.
But is that really a perfect playing if he didn't win the 3 small prizes to go along with it?
I think perfect playing for that kind of a game doesn't necessarily mean you win everything possible so much as you play the game perfectly. I mean, they wouldn't call it a second chance if that constituted a perfect playing. But I see where you're coming from, and there is that little bit of confusion there. I say that while he did not win the maximum possible amount of stuff that he could win in the game, I would absolutely call it a perfect playing of Pathfinder.
And this was the first time it was played perfectly since July 17th, 2008. It was played right up to the last digit perfectly 3 more times since then. And 2 of the people ended up winning. 1 person lost after getting the first 4 digits right. And that was back in 2009.
Oof. Was it pretty much falling for trap 5s and 0s and 9s?
That was probably it. I would love to go back and look back at it. I should probably go look at it, but all I know is that it was lost on the last digit. So.
Also, something of note that happened, not as much of a concern to the casual fan, but the diehards will take note that for the first time ever, Checkout appeared as the first game, and it was for a car, and it was won, just to add icing to that cake, but Checkout never been first. I'm surprised at that, honestly, but that's mildly notable.
I mean, I suppose it makes sense for it not to be first to a degree. I mean, I don't know the electronics of it, if it was difficult to set up, but it didn't seem like it was the most difficult game to set up first. So.
It isn't, especially, well, hey, they had a calculator there for a while.
Well, that's true.
I miss dearly from that game.
Just real quick, I did look up the playing JJ was talking about, and it was between a 0 and a 1, and it was the 1 was the correct answer.
Of course the 1 was the correct answer. That $1 lose. So those were some notable Price is Right moments, some iconic wins. If we turn that over a little bit, first off we have, well, Triple Play was played for the first time in a long time. It's one of those big 3 games in addition to Golden Road and 3 Strikes, where they play it for not so much luxury cars, but they play it for 3 cars. And of course, the contestant on this wipes out on the first car because he thought that the Chevrolet Spark was between $12,000 and $14,000, which honestly, I can't really blame him for, because we joked about the $13,005 Nissan Versa earlier this season. So he probably realized that the Chevy Spark was one of the lower end vehicles, if not the lowest on the Chevy line right now. So I can't really fault him for that.
I mean, if he was a couple of seasons earlier, the Spark was like, $13,000. They used to have the $13,000 Spark, so oh well.
And honestly, I have no problem with the first car being super cheap in Triple Play. None. Because if they're going to give away 3, yeah, they should probably have one of them be on the cheaper side.
It's a nice build-up, really.
We're going to have a Mercedes-Benz, a Porsche, and a Toyota Tacoma behind door number 3. The only truck that the show seems to give out now.
Yes. No Dodge, no Ford yet.
Yeah. Yeah, we keep track of those vehicles. The only truck that the show's tried to give away is the Toyota Tacoma 4x2 access cab.
That's what I think of. When I think of pickups, I think of Toyota.
Well, Toyota's been really big in marketing that. Like, I was watching some football earlier today, and the Toyota Tacoma commercial aired like 20 times over that 3-hour period.
That's a good point, though. I'll be watching that thinking that it's a Ford or Dodge commercial, and then it's Toyota.
Yeah, they're definitely trying to get their name out there in the truck market. Another game that had a less than average playing was Pocket Change, in which the contestant was able to rack up a car price of $2.50, which is an all-time record for that game. The maximum possible price being $2.75.
I find it very interesting that prior to this, we had a couple of people who reached $2.25, and that no one had actually reached this newest plateau of $2.50. Oh, I think everybody was really hoping that after she really messed up on that second number, I think everybody was really hoping for $2.75.
Does that make us terrible people, though, when we're actually actively rooting against the contestant? Like, let's see how far this hole's gonna go.
Well, I mean, Jeopardy had that contestant a while ago that had was in negative 4,000, and it's like at that point, they're not going to win anyway. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's still possible in both cases, Pocket Change and Jeopardy. They're not going to win, but it's like, can they get to negative 10,000? Can they, what is the record? It starts getting questioned. You feel bad for them, but at the same time, it's like...
If you were the contestant on Jeopardy and you had negative 4,000 and you knew you weren't going to win, would you try to get as low as you possibly could?
I guess it depends on if you want to be known as that person or not. You'd get YouTube fame, but is it the kind of YouTube fame you want?
Mm-hmm. We knew she probably could win, but hey, she could win, possibly.
With that $2 card up there, obviously it's very possible. Pocket Change is one of those games where you can screw up gloriously and still luck into a win.
It would have been hilarious if she'd gotten the $2 card on first pick or something. You got $2. You still got to keep going because you haven't reached $2.50 yet.
Yeah, because they always dress up the $2 card as an instant win condition, which for most playings of the game, it is. But not that one. The other game that had issues this past week, Money Game. Money Game had what people consider the lowest amount of cash won in that game, which I think was like $84. 84, 85, yeah, something like that. It was the lowest possible cash total that they could have gotten. Not ever, but with the 9 numbers that they had on the board, it was the lowest possible total. I don't think that is as notable because it's completely circumstantial in how they want to set up the game.
Well, see, I don't think it's completely his fault. I think he played it well enough. The options he had El Cheapo up there. He had $6,
Which he went with.
there, and he went with it and he lost. And it's interesting to note that that playing was the first time in 2 years that El Cheapo was not correct. For the last 2 years, whenever they had El Cheapo on the board, which was apparently 12 times, it was correct to be picked. So I can't blame him for picking it and it not working out.
They probably just have those wrong digits on there. Like, they needed 0 something. The fact that it was 06 is completely irrelevant. I mean, they could see like, oh, this looks kind of okay, but it's definitely not to the same extent as trying to force a low cash amount versus having something in like any number where the piggy bank is worth 12 cents or something.
Yeah. God, I can't imagine them doing that.
I'm sure they have at some point way back in the day, back when 12 cents actually meant something. When 12 cents could net you a cheeseburger.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. 1972.
No buns, no buns.
Oh, okay. We've already got those carb watchers in 72. I want, can I get a burger with no buns? With my pack of cigarettes? Thank you.
Yeah, that's what they were saying in line at the gas station while they were waiting for the gas because it was an every other day thing.
Right.
Ah, the 70s. Moving on to what we were actually going to talk about a little bit 2 weeks ago, but we never got around to just because we ran out of time. The Jeopardy! Tournament of Champions concluded. The big ol' here's the smartest contestants with the largest amount of winnings over the course of the past year. Let's have them duke it out head-to-head and have some really exciting competition. Theoretically. In actuality, kind of a landslide, actually. To the point where Alex could actually, what Nick was referencing in his introduction to this episode for the Final Jeopardy, he could say, what is a leave? And I'm sure if you've seen that on social media and you don't know what that reference is, a leave is the main sponsor of Jeopardy! And they always have their what is a leave that Johnny Gilbert announces as a commercial break right before Final Jeopardy! So he was just kind of, poking fun of that. Alex ended up taking home the entire tournament. What was the grand prize? 75,000, or was it $1 million?
Oh no, not $1 million.
No, it was definitely not $1 million. No.
Yeah, it was either 70.
I want to say it was was it 100K?
It was 250.
No, 250. Yeah.
250. Second place had 100,000. Third was 50,000.
Well, my goodness, that's oh my! It's to be Matt Jackson or Kerry Green. It's to be able to even get into the finals, knowing you got that payday coming regardless.
Yeah, and I saw people talking about this online, especially because someone I know in real life went up against Alex on the show and lost miserably. So, yeah, the main reason why he won, and people may not realize this when they're watching Jeopardy, is it doesn't really matter how much you know on the show. I mean, it does. You have to get on the show. But I'd say 3/4 of the success people have on Jeopardy, buzzer timing. You have to know exactly when to buzz in. Because all because someone answers the question quickly does not mean that the other two contestants did not know the answer to that question. They just didn't get the lock-in time.
And I think on that point, that's why they used to do back in the 90s, they would have a seniors tournament specifically for that reason. The seniors that didn't have the reflexes, that may have had the knowledge, but they couldn't compete against, the younger people with the faster reflexes. They specifically had the seniors separate. I don't know why they stopped. Probably just too many tournaments coming around. But
this is something I was thinking about. Does Jeopardy overdo the tournaments thing? Like, they have the teen tournament, they have the college tournament, they have the teachers tournament, they have the Tournament of Champions. Do they have too many?
It almost feels like it.
I think the teachers is too many.
Yeah, because when you don't have, the Tournament of Champions isn't always every season thing. It's sometimes a season and a half. It's not always every year.
Right.
So that you can sort of take that one out. And then I like the teen tournament and the college tournament.
I wouldn't mind the teachers tournament as much if they actually didn't make the questions much easier for it.
Easier questions or answers, I guess, whatever you want to call it. But Celebrity Jeopardy pops up a lot, too. But
Celebrity Jeopardy, at least it's for charity, so I can kind of understand why they do that. It's the same thing that we get on Prices Back a lot for having all these different specials and everything. And Jeopardy, they have to have those kinds of tournaments. That's really all they can do because they can't just, pause for one day to have a special show. That's just not something they do. They'll have a tournament of teachers or whatever for a week.
It's a thing where, I guess there's not really as many Celebrity Jeopardies as there were in the 90s because there was
Celebrity Everything back in the 90s.
There were a ton in the 90s, and it really did slow down towards the back half of the Aughties. And as we've entered this decade, it's kind of grown more and more. And of course, they had the $1 million celebrity tournament 2009, 2010. So
Yeah, but I feel like a lot of that also has to do with when the show came out, because the big, 85 was Live Aid. Yeah, that sounds about right.
yeah,
Then you had Farm Aid and We Are the World, and all that stuff. So charity was a big thing in the 80s and 90s, so the game shows were just kind of latching onto that. Whereas now, I feel like people probably give more to charity, but they don't make as big of a spectacle about it. If a celebrity wants to donate to charity, usually they're just going to go ahead and do it.
mm-hmm.
They don't need to go like, well, I'm going to donate to charity. I got to make sure people see this. What's going on Jeopardy? But Randy was mentioning how they had a senior version of Jeopardy for the older people, which is kind of a nice little segue to what else we're going to talk about, because on the other end of the coin, instead of having just a senior edition of Jeopardy, they had Jep, the kids show version of Jeopardy. And we're going to talk a little bit about game shows for children, and not just Nickelodeon. Jep was not a Nickelodeon show. So we'll start with Jep, because we were just talking about Jeopardy a little bit. But Jep was probably the closest in format to its parent show.
Well, first off, I just love how they didn't. It was too much for kids to say the whole word, maybe spell it out, so they just shortened down to just Jep.
And they dropped the O, too.
Like, it's just too much for the kids.
Well, it's probably them just trying to sound hip. Like, what do people probably call the show? Like, hey, you want to go home and watch some Jep?
That's what goes at all.
Isn't he running for president now, Jep?
Yes.
Jep is one of those shows, and I don't mean to discount the show at all when I say this, but if you've seen Jeopardy, you've seen Jep more or less. It's the exact same format as just, children-specific topics. There's not much different about it in the format and everything. But then you go to the sister show of that, and that is Wheel 2000. Wheel 2000 is a show I remember really liking when I was a kid, but then I saw clips of it online a year or two back, and I'm like, this is terrible. What happened?
I think they did a really good job of making the show fun for kids to watch, because I also enjoyed it when I was younger.
Yep.
But Wheel 2000, if you don't remember, there was no Vanna White. I don't even remember the name of the guy who hosted Wheel 2000.
Oh yeah, but Cyber Lucy.
Cyber Lucy. Vanna with attitude and a voice. People complain when the models got voices, when they got microphoned on Price is Right back in the season 39, season 40 time. But yeah, when I'm just saying, no disrespect to Vanna. There's no reason for Vanna to talk during gameplay at all. And Wheel 2000 kind of shows you why. Because just hey, you got a T. There's 3 of them. I'm like, the host is barely even hosting at that point. All the host does is $2.50.
Host of Wheel 2000, former Roundhouse player David Sidoni.
Oh, yeah.
That's moving up in the world. And the Wheel 2000 wheel was really strange in that it had wedges of different sizes. I think the 250 was the one that was absolutely gigantic. Instead of Bankrupt, they had the Creature, which they had the light showing it that there was some sort of monster living under the wheel, and it actually ate all your winnings, which I thought that was actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
And they always tried to relate it to physical fitness in a way. They're like, okay, we know that people are just spinning the wheel, but now we're going to teach you how to eat properly. It's very much a product of its time.
It was.
Very much so.
For goodness sakes, they had a wheel2000.com space.
Yeah, that alone.
Go to our website.
And if you keep talking about shows that wanted to promote healthy eating, we can talk about Gladiators 2000. Gladiators 2000, the spin-off of American Gladiators, hosted by Ryan Seacrest, of all people, for 2 seasons. That was from 1994 to 1996. Very similar to the format of regular American Gladiators, except, not nearly as... Well, actually, it's kind of cheesier in a way. Because I don't remember the name of the actual event in American Gladiators where you had, the different colored balls and you had to, grab them and dunk them into your basket or whatever. Except on Gladiators 2000, they're okay, the blue ones are carbohydrates and they're going to be worth 5 points. The yellow ones are proteins and they're worth 3. Those pesky red ones are the fats, and since you don't want as many of them, they're only worth 1. And I remember it being okay.
It was okay. I didn't watch much of that one. I will say that.
The main problem with Gladiators 2000 is that American Gladiators was an hour-long show, and Gladiators 2000 was a half hour, and it showed that Gladiators in any format just doesn't really work in 30 minutes. It needed that extended period of time. But then you could go on the whole tangent of, is American Gladiators even a game show in the first place? I would say it is, even though only 4 contestants compete. I mean, 3 only compete in Wheel of Fortune. And 4
I kind of lean
Gladiators.
towards, it is a competition, so it is a competition. It's physical stunts. It's stunts that are, I guess they're like a little more, physically strenuous than Guts, but again, not that far off from something you would see on Guts or maybe a stunt on Double Dare if it was like a really hard stunt. So
I like how you're name dropping Guts, and we can just move right into Guts then, I suppose. Guts was on the air for probably longer than it should have been. I think it was on the air for 5 years. 4, definitely at least 4. When Guts first started, it was terrible. Because they just okay, we have a bunch of kids that are really athletic. What are we going to do? Let's have them play aces with a tennis racket. Let's have them just kind of meanderingly jog around the Extreme Arena. Again, Extreme Arena. Guts was absolutely a 90s byproduct. Let's not kid ourselves here.
Indeed.
And the Aggro Crag and the Mega Crag.
And then there was another one. The
Super Aggro Crag.
That's right.
And the only prize you won was a trophy. You didn't even get a trip to Jamaica. So Guts probably had the lowest budget of any of those shows.
I know.
Guts had no budget.
That's why they made so many episodes. Let's just... What? How much money do you need? Only $20,000? Take it. Go ahead.
But I enjoyed Guts. I felt like in the later seasons... they added more events, but somehow I felt like I kept seeing the same events over and over again. As much as I love me some basic training, which was the obstacle course one, I felt like I saw that all the time. I hated the events in the pool because they picked really strong athletic children, but apparently not ones that could swim very well. And then you had the basketball bungee one. My favorite event was always the one where you had to jump down off the risers, you dip your feet in the ink, and then you had to try and kick up on the wall as high as you could. That was always my favorite.
God, what would be my favorite? I didn't mind the high jump one, over the top. It would always be fun, for me to see if someone could finally, hit that 8-foot mark, or if they would continue to hit the pole. So
I have a tie for the ones I hated the most. I never cared for peak to peak, which is pretty much just jump over here, jump over here, jump over here, jump over here. And that's pretty bad when that was relegated to the first event of American Ninja Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of having 5 minutes devoted to it, you have 20 seconds. And the other one I hated was 0G, the one where they had to they strung them up like a marionette and had them run sideways.
Mm-hmm. That one was okay. I like the tornado run too. I like the running through all the. I just love how it's just some of the events you would just know how excited Mike O'Malley was to even commentate on the events, and I love that sometimes.
Yeah, Mike O'Malley is a good host, but I think he definitely put himself into it a little too much. You could definitely tell what he was thinking. Speaking of Mike O'Malley, we'll stick with Nickelodeon and move over to Get the Picture. His first stint as a Nickelodeon game show host. And you want to talk about Mike O'Malley definitely wearing his heart on his sleeve while he was doing his job. Watch him Get the Picture once in a while. And he just gives up hosting halfway through most episodes. It's pretty hilarious. Get the Power Surge! I forgot about Power. And Get the Picture, again, one of those games where I never saw anybody win, ever.
I saw a few people. I watched a lot of the picture when it was on Gas, and so I saw some people win, but it wasn't easy. Memory's hard.
It is. Also, since we're mentioning Nickelodeon, we talked about Guts. I always considered it its sister show, and that is Legends of the Hidden Temple, which was my jam. That was the show that I was all about. That was the first show I ever saw on cable television, actually. I remember we just saw, hey, we have channel 14 and up. Let's just check out what happens. We get to 16, which is Nickelodeon of mine. I saw people playing temple games in front of this giant stone head, and I'm like, oh, hell yeah, I'm watching this.
It's also the show that gave Torgo the most nightmares as a child.
What are you talking about? I was not scared of temple guards.
No, just you were scared of every time someone would step on the steps of knowledge and not give the correct answer and just buzz out.
Legends of the Hidden Temple, its main problem was that its budget was too large, I felt. And they spent it all on the set and the set pieces. And there was nothing left for prizes and stuff. Because I'm sure all these kids who live in Florida, where do you want to go? Well, I definitely want to go to Roseland Ranch in upstate New York. Which, by the way, doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, yeah, you can tell which ones were at the beginning of the season, because they give away like a trip to Jamaica. And then there's the Roseland Ranch.
I just love the partying gifts for the people that come and say, "Oh, you didn't win. Well, here's some tuna and green shampoo,"
which they're already in.
Here's a $25 savings bond from Nesquik. You better hold on to that for 10 years because it's not $25 yet, but it will be.
It will be.
You just relax. It's only like 12 cents right now.
Hopefully Nesquik is still going to be around, which it is, frankly.
Since we're on Nickelodeon, a show that I don't know, is it considered a game show? And that is What Would You Do? What Would You Do was a show that Mark Summers hosted. It was originally just like what they used at Nickelodeon Studios to warm up the audiences before they went to another game. And someone's like, hey, let's just film this. And it lasted quite a while. Is it a game show, though?
I would say no, but I really, really enjoyed it. I really loved
I would say no as well. It's kind of in the same boat as like your Whose Line Is It Anyway. It's not a game show, but what exactly would you call it? So
maybe it's best suited as a variety show.
There's
game show elements, especially at the end with the wall of stuff. You know, the doors 1 through 20. You have to open one up, see what happens. Yeah. You're probably going to end up with some sort of whipped cream in your face.
I would consider it more of a variety type show.
Yeah, the only thing I remember from that show is the Pie Pod.
They had the Pie Pod, they had the Pie Wash, they had the Pie Coaster, they had the Pie Slide.
Pie Slide, Pie in the Sky.
And near the end of the season, for whatever reason, they just had, like, monkeys everywhere. But that was a weird show, because if you watch it, they just have, like... We want to introduce a very special guest who's blatantly just, like, a street performer that they just pulled off Main Street from Orlando. They're like, hey, get on the show, it'll be great.
What I also really loved about it, I loved that it was kind of like a sister show, almost in a way, to Double Dare, by only the simple fact that not only Mark Summers hosted, but Robin was there as well, and I love that connectivity there.
That's true, and speaking of connectivity, let's talk about good old Double Dare. Children's Double Dare, not, Double Dare 70s Alex Trebek. And then Super Sloppy Double Dare, and then back to Double Dare, and then Family Double Dare, and then My Family's Got Double Dare, and then Double Dare 2000.
No, that's My Family's Got Guts.
I know, I was making a joke.
I see what he did there.
Double Dare is one of those shows where everybody remembers the obstacle course more than anything. Which, for my money, is one of, up there with the Temple Run, as one of the best end games in any game show. That's 60 seconds of obstacle course. You were glued to your television just watching them do it.
I mean, sometimes you were screaming at your television. Same with, Legends of the Hidden Temple. Those were the ones where you would really scream at your television like, what are you doing?
The monkey's 3 pieces!
How can you know how to assemble a monkey?
To be fair, it's because the back of the monkey is to them, so it's not in as defined a contour. Maybe they just can't see what they're doing.
That is true.
But with Double Dare, if you watch it now as an adult, it isn't as obvious because you get a prize for every single obstacle that you complete. Mm-hmm. But now it's very apparent when there was budget mode by what obstacle there was. It's like, okay, they have all this easy stuff, but then you watch it later, it's like, okay, so they have to cross the pool, and they have to get in the gumball machine, like actually climb up the ladder and get in the gumball machine, and they have the Sunday slide, and they have the oil pipeline, and they have the sandwich, and they have the nose that you have to pick to get through. Forget it, you're not winning in 60 seconds.
The sandwich and the pizza were the worst.
I feel like it was a lot of like pricing game lineups where they had like a time for each one. They're like, okay, so what timing is this? Obviously, this one, the longer the time, like the worse the contestant would do. But I wonder if that's how they like, they're like, okay, and then they want it harder and whatnot. So,
and then you have the ones that are like soda jerk. Press on a button, the flag's going to hit you with some soda. Grab it, move on.
If the flag falls down.
Yeah, Double Dare is the game I remember the most malfunctions happening of any game show. More like, how often was it like, oh, well, I guess they just forgot to put a flag in the tuna, so we're just going to give you that prize anyway.
Yep. I'm reminded of when they had the old, it was a short-lived obstacle where they had the flag in a pillow sack full of feathers. And the one time they go through the pillow sack, time runs out, they don't find the flag, but they keep looking through the pillow sack to say, hey, it's in here somewhere, and they literally just go to the credits with them still pulling out feathers. Like, we're gonna find that flag in here.
Well, and actually on that obstacle, that was the first ever taped obstacle, and that was the taped it. I assume maybe the first episode, because they don't want it losing on the first one and look bad, so they didn't find the flag. The second one, they taped it again, still couldn't find the flag. Third time they found it, but then the cameraman got knocked over, so they retaped it a fourth time.
And Double Dare was a show that really did have to get better with time. Because if you watch some early episodes, they wrote easy questions. They didn't write questions that would induce a physical challenge. So sometimes they would go an entire round without a physical challenge, or maybe just one physical challenge.
Because, I mean, granted, for an adult, the trivia stuff is great, but a child wants to watch Double Dare because they want to see people do the wacky stunts.
Exactly.
Well, and they did that later on. Usually it was the third question of the game would be what they'd consider an impossible question or whatnot, and very rarely would a contestant get it right.
Someone would get it right.
Yeah, and then because they knew that that's what they wanted was a physical challenge. So
then they had Double Dare 2000, which they brought back around the turn of the new millennium. Gets a lot of hate. I don't really. Well, I do understand why. And there's 3 words, and Nick probably says it better than anybody else. The 3 words why everybody hates Double Dare 2000.
Triple Dare Challenge!
Whoa, 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 whoa! And all that fun stuff. Yeah, yeah. The time killer extraordinaire. The whole, we didn't have time to really write questions, so let's just hype up the Triple Dare Challenge some more, which pretty much ate up the entire second round. Yeah. I've definitely seen episodes where there was one question, no one got it, physical challenge, Triple Dare Challenge, and that was the end of the round.
When they come back, everybody stands back at the podium, and then you hear, like, what happened?
The prizes were decent on Double Dare 2000, though.
Jason
Harris is a good host. I don't care what anybody says. He's no Mark Summers. Mark Summers
of course.
Is Double Dare for the children. But Jason Harris absolutely held his own on that show. Good energy, genuinely cared, was able to get messy with the children when he wanted to. I thought he did a great job.
And he was picked by Mark, so...
Oh, well, that helps.
I didn't know that.
But I love that clear Zenith television.
Oh,
it
yeah.
made me want to clear television. Like, oh, look at this. I can see the inside of my TV.
But the worst Double Dare obstacle for my money is always, like, you see this and you're like, they ain't winning that. That was always the one where they had to, like, make cakes. Like, you need to make a 9-layer cake.
Oh, you're talking physical challenge?
Yeah, the physical challenge, the one that nobody ever won. Like, here's like these foam cutouts of like cake layers. Put some chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and you could tell by like usually it's like 5 or 6. Like, we need a 55-layer cake in 30 seconds for $200. Oh, but Triple Dare Challenge, it's actually 75 layers of that cake. That and like the salad shooter one where you had like the helmet and the basket on your helmet, and you just stand under the salad shooter, and you just kind of had to pray that your teammate could like shoot like a 12-foot jump shot with a water balloon.
Now, how did you guys feel about the one where they were in this big house set, and it was an earthquake, and they had to like place the table? I kind of liked that one.
I liked it better when it was called Finders Keepers.
I mean, but unlike Finders Keepers, I mean, like the whole thing shook and everything, and I liked it.
The worst one for me, I think I read somewhere that was actually never won, was the slot machine one.
Which one was the slot machine?
They would have all 4 of the contestants stand there, and then they would pull the handle. The slime would shoot down on one of the 4 spots, and then that contestant would run over and start pulling the handle, and they had to get all 4 contestants slimed in the 30 seconds.
That.
How can they control that, though?
It was complete luck. So you could move around and choose which spot after the thing was slotted, but still it was complete luck. And then you had the Triple Dare Challenge come in that would add, I don't remember what it was. I think it was after all 4 were slimed, which they didn't. You had to run over to the big bucket and pull that down or something.
Yeah, something ridiculous. I mentioned Finders Keepers. Finders Keepers, I had honestly never seen growing up as a kid. That was like one of those things where you saw it, you were aware of its existence, but like Nick News, you just didn't really care all that much. Sorry, Linda Ellerby.
Yeah, I like Nick News.
I mean, it's okay now, but when you're like 6 or 7, you're like, whatever. But Finders Keepers was pretty much the precursor to Legends of the Hidden Temple. They had this giant house set, and you had to just like find these things. It's not as good as Legends of the Hidden Temple. I'll put that out there entirely. It's definitely, they were still trying to figure out what to do when you had this giant set. You had to go through all the rooms in the house. And these houses had like a dungeon for some reason. Like a crypt was in there.
They just wanted to make jokes with the different rooms. They had Tarzan's room and something else that was. They had a bakery in the house. Like a bakery. What is this?
Well, that's where Mommy and Daddy put buns in the oven. That's just the Y7 way to say it, even though ratings didn't exist back then. A show I want to talk about a little bit, which is kind of in the same vein as that, Legends of the Hidden Temple and Finders Keepers, not a Nickelodeon show, Masters of the Maze.
I was going to mention that, yeah.
I never saw it.
Masters of the Maze, well, the show was very different depending on who hosted it. The one that sticks in my head always is the J.D. Roth version. J.D. Roth, by the way, who hosted like every children's show not on Nickelodeon for whatever reason. That man got around.
And very young, too.
He was a very good host, but he was a workaholic back then. Like I know he hosted that. Zoo Venture, I believe, was him also.
Yes.
Where the prize was he got to be zookeeper for a day, which is the biggest crock of crap I think ever. Yeah, you get to wear like a pith helmet and you get to just go around for like 8 hours and you get to like, here, feed this goat. You're a zookeeper. That's it. Go home.
Here, you get to dodge poop, kids. Yay.
The dodge poop, is that what they're calling the challenger now?
We're teaching you about life. You're going to have a bunch of crap thrown at you all day.
Now, was that Discovery Channel or Animal Planet? I think that was Animal Planet back when it first came out.
Zoo Venture, I think it was, yes.
Yeah. But going back to Masters of the Maze, it was one of those shows where the entire gimmick was based on the bonus round, which took forever to do. Mm-hmm. And only one person on the team could do it. But you like couldn't even see what you were doing. Like it was a maze, but you had to wear this helmet and like headphones, which was the bulkiest thing on the planet. Like there was no way you could see what you were doing. And like your teammate couldn't even talk to you. They had like pulse, like buttons. They had to like pulse on your left side to make you want to turn to the left, and the right side to make you want to turn to the right. Again, that's one of those it's definitely early 90s. And then for whatever reason, they dropped it, retooled the show a little bit. They got rid of J.D. Roth, and in their place, they got Mario Lopez to host that show.
I'm not surprised. He's a name.
He is a name more than J.D. Roth, even though a J.D. Roth's version was definitely... From what I remember, J.D. Roth's bonus round was a lot better, and he was a better host. The lead-up rounds for Mario Lopez's version were better. But the actual maze itself was a little anticlimactic. Like, I think only one person got to run the maze. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just going off memory. But I think only one team got to run the maze with the Mario Lopez version, and you weren't even guaranteed a prize at that point. Like, they definitely did some tooling and stuff, and they had, like, trivia questions at the end, and... Like, I am the keeper of the animal kingdom, and like these giant heads on the wall and stuff. It was bizarre.
It was a complex show.
It was. They definitely put the effort into it. Like, there was a budget. They tried.
Yeah.
But for the life of me, I cannot remember what channel it was on.
Oh, the Family Channel.
That's right, the Family Channel. Along with Family Challenge. And there's one show I want to mention that was on the Family Channel. I swear I'm the only one that ever remembers this happening, but I promise you this happened. I can't even find any record of it online. The show is called Maximum Drive. It's the show where they race like cubby bikes and motocross and ATVs and these like mud tanks, I guess. I'm not entirely sure what those were. But I remember that, and they had like these teams of 3 that were always blue, purple, and black. And they were always named after animals. And then they had like a final at the end. And this is what I always remember. One of the teams that made it to the finals were the Bats. And they were always blue the entire tournament. They were always the blue team. The finals, for whatever reason, they made them black. So they're sitting there racing. They're going around like all the tracks and everything on their bikes. And for whatever reason, they do the handoff to the next teammate. And that teammate, thinking he's the blue team, like always, steals the blue team's bike and keeps going around the track. And the announcer's like, well, not only is he disqualified, but he has also disqualified the black team because they can't even race anymore. So the purple team, who I believe was the Cobras, is the only team that's even eligible. So they're just sitting there and they end up winning. And then they have like their victory at the end. And the other two teams are just so pissed off. It's not even funny.
They should have just reshot that at that point.
Yeah.
Let's just reshot.
No, they very much let it happen. I remember that vividly watching the finals of Maximum Drive. I can't see any record of that episode online. I'm just going off memory, but trust me, That happened.
That would be fun to see.
The Family Channel used to have a lot of that kind of stuff. Like, remember the Family Challenge?
Of course, that was
Good
the
old
last
Ray
big
Combs.
thing with Ray Combs. Yeah.
It was pretty much, well, we want to do Double Dare. Like, we want to do Family Double Dare, but we can't do Family Double Dare because rights. So let's just cobble some stuff together and see what happens. But I remember it being really good. I remember the staging of that show being crazy. Let's do a game up in the audience.
It was everywhere. And, I mean, Ray Combs, he was fresh off of Family Feud. He was good at that kind of stuff. He was really good at it, so.
So I guess we'll just mention this as like a final jumping off point for discussion before we wrap this up. With kids' game shows, I feel like the creativity was definitely there more than with, I guess, adult game shows. And in today's television market, I mean, you don't have to be a television expert to know that kids' networks are definitely straight, keeping with cartoons, or if they do live action, it's definitely more of like, I call them the Nick coms, like, your Clarissa Explains It Alls, and your Are You Afraid of the Dark to an extent, and your all that and stuff. Like your sitcom stuff, Zoe 101, Zach and Cody.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really do game shows. Do you feel like the passion for doing kids' game shows just isn't there? And if these people who made all these shows aren't doing the kids' game shows, why can't they bring some of that creativity to some new IPs instead of just having a lot of the game shows kind of fizzle out after 3 or 4 episodes because it just isn't a good idea?
I don't know. It's weird. I don't even feel like they're trying that well on their regular show front. So like when they have sitcoms and stuff, I don't think they're trying that well anyway. I mean, I look at Nick's current sitcom lineup and it's like they're original premises, but it's just the same thing. And I feel if they're still there, most of the people that used to do the original things from the 90s, they just, I don't know, kind of petered out.
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the whole idea of children's television was still relatively a new concept. Like Nickelodeon debuted in the 80s, mid-late 80s, something like that.
It was the early 80s, yeah.
So they were just bringing up all these ideas, and trust me, we might do another episode of this down the line because there's so many different shows we just never touched upon. But they had all these different ideas because everything was new and exciting, and there was no precedent. So they're like, let's just go guns blazing and just come up with every idea we have and see what sticks, because with no precedent, you have to really stick out in the crowd, especially for an untapped potential such as children's television. So I think maybe the reason why we remember so fondly some of those wacky ideas is because they were trying that much harder to make, maybe not only just for themselves, but to try and make the format of children's television stick, because it was seen as a novelty definitely back in the day. I remember my kids were like, a children's television network? That's absurd. That's completely unheard of. There's not enough material to make a network out of that for a while.
Yeah, and Nickelodeon proved them wrong. Cartoon Network. Well, Cartoon Network was easy to do. Cartoon Network was Ted Turner saying, well, I've got all this money and I've purchased 4,000 films. Might as well put them to use. But it ended up working out great in the end. So
True story.
So I hope it gets back to that level.
I mean, everybody wishes that kids were able to experience what they experienced as kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's nostalgia filter. I mean, it's hard to tell because honestly, I don't sit there watching children's shows all the time, so I can't really attest to the quality of those shows because they're not made for me. It's not made to my sensibilities. Maybe this is what they want. I'm sure they focus group everything now to make sure that, like, is this what kids want to see? And obviously, if they're still on the air, they must be doing something right.
Yeah, that's what I figure. Like I said, I don't like the current sitcoms on Nickelodeon, but I'm like, well, maybe it's me. Maybe it's just, obviously aren't making it for me anymore, so maybe I just don't get it.
And the fact that they have to compete with so many different forms of entertainment, like when we were children, Nickelodeon was pretty much all we had. The internet was still relatively new. We had like a Packard Bell PC, and I mean, it was Windows 3.1, and we had Prodigy as our internet server. So now there's so many entertainment options. I feel like maybe it's not that stuff is bad so much as there's so much of it, it just gets lost in the shuffle.
I think that's also truthful.
I think that's going to wrap things up for this week's episode of Contestants Not Appearing on Stage. Anybody have any minor stories that they want to mention that we didn't touch upon today before we go ahead and, as I always say, close the books on the episode?
Fun fact about Double Dare 2000 was that it was probably the first show that Nickelodeon ever filmed in high definition.
I remember the widescreen bars on that.
So don't know if we'll ever get to see a high definition episode of it, but it was filmed in high definition for experimental stuff with Sony. So it's one of the first shows to be done that way.
I do want to just get your guys' opinion real quick on something that happened a couple weeks ago we didn't talk about, but the whole Wheel of Fortune.
Oh, yeah.
With the lady with the guessing some interesting choices.
Oh, yeah. We were supposed to talk about it, and we just never got around to it.
You forgot.
And this was Veterans Week, and she was in the blue spot. She had a pretty decent lead. Not a commanding lead, but a pretty decent lead. And they go into the speed-up round, and she decides, I'm going to call really weird letters if I decide to call letters at all. Like, how many times did she not call anything? Twice, I think?
She buzzed out twice.
Which, that's extremely rare in and of itself.
Like, her letter calls were like Q, X, Z, buzz, and then she buzzed out 2 more times. You know, some people were wondering, was she just stupid, or was she purposely throwing that round to give the other veterans that were with her an opportunity to win some cash, particularly the player in red who had nothing at that point?
I'm leaning towards the latter because a lot of people's argument against that as well. There's no way she would have tried to give someone the cash because she didn't have enough of a lead. She definitely would have, lost the lead potentially and lost the game. But then you have to look at somebody like Leonard on the teen tournament that we just had a year or two ago on Jeopardy, where his final answer was some old guy, but I just won $75,000. Now that was not a guaranteed win for him when he did that. The math was possible for Neeli or whatever his name was to take the win. So I think it was basically the idea was there, but maybe just as I've said before, when you're on the show and the lights are on and it's the moment.
I know.
You may not necessarily be thinking squarely. So I think the intention was there, that she wanted the other contestants to win something, but maybe she just didn't think it out right.
Yeah, it's just not well thought out, because by the time the red player solved, the yellow player had $9,000 and 9,000 plus, and that would have been enough for the yellow player, had he called another letter and solved, to beat her in the end of the day. So I was like, you could have at least called one letter.
And I think that's going to do it for this week's episode of Contestants Not Appearing on Stage. Thank you so much for listening to this. Enjoy your Thanksgiving, whatever it is that you do. Enjoy your holiday season, and we will be back in the next week or so with another episode. Until then, see you later. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to Contestants Not Appearing on Stage, part of the Torgo Entertainment Network. For more episodes of Contestants Not Appearing on Stage, check us out on YouTube or online at CNAOScast.net. This is Contestants. I'm so mad at this. Who played that?
It wasn't me.
Not me.
Randy.
Hi there.
Randy just is going to learn the meaning of the word post-production today.
Contestants Not Appearing on Stage, a weekly game show podcast for game show enthusiasts.
Why do we need to tape it? We already have it recorded. Just play it.
Because it doesn't have the episode number, the recording day, the title.
Just have it be like a voicemail. Episode 6.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Contestants Not Appearing on Stage. My name is Torgo. Let's see who's joining me this week.
Oh, I'm Jason, JJMan920, Price is J, a number of things. And I think I'm going to go higher, Jim.
Randy.
What do I have to be next?
Because Nick is last.
I didn't know we had an agenda here. Okay, so I'm just going to... Okay.
See, Jordan's not here because he's sick, so JJ's sitting there waiting because Jordan usually jumps on being the second person to introduce himself. We're all like, oh.
Who's going to take that first plunge?
Yeah. So we are all here. You know who's not here right now? Jim
Whoa, that's...
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Well, 6 episodes was a good run, boys.
That's one of those groaners. Oh, that reminds me of SNL last night. That's great.
Oh man. Oh. So before we get into the meat of the episode, we should